Color Commentary. We are your pauper commentators, Michael Petchick and Adrian Gonzalez. How's it going, Adrian?
Spiffy.
Spiffy.
How are you? Spiffy.
Doing all right. Feeling a little bit better. And also for folks who have been complaining about recent audio glitches that have occurred, I purchased new cables. My audio should sound better. One of my cables I think was going, and I'm not sure which it was, so I just replaced all of them. Any new updates in your life, Adrian, or everything's still the same?
Everything's pretty much the same.
All right. Well, we've got an interesting, kind of last minute topic that we came up with here, but we think it's something interesting. But first things first, we got to take care of upkeep. Let you know who brings this show to you on a weekly basis, and that starts off with Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art's a wonderful website. They have all sorts of playmats, tokens, dice bags, and even art prints of famous magic art, as well as art from the rest of history. They've got tokens with, Monet and Van Gogh on them. They make really, really quality stuff, and I stand by their products wholeheartedly. If you are, the type of person who might, for example, like some nice playmats of magic art that can't be purchased anywhere else, that have been licensed directly by the artists, like all sorts of cool stuff. They've done like Gaia's Cradle in the past. Go check out Original Magic Art today. And if you decide to buy something, how about you use our affiliate code? As you're checking out, you can enter the code Commontary, all caps, spelled as it is in the name of this podcast, and you will get 5% off, and we get a little kickback from your order. So you're helping keep the lights on here, and you're also getting a little bit of a discount yourself. And once again, that code is Commontary, all caps, spelled as it is in the name of this podcast, and you'll get your little discount. What do you have for us, Adrian?
For just as little as $1 an episode, you can also join our Patreon, hear the full show pre and post, and then get access to our special patron Discord channel. It's pretty sweet.
Have you been seeing those dog photos that have been showing up in our Discord?
There are some great dog photos in there, some good boys.
Oh yeah. Recent influx thanks to one of our newer patrons who happens to be married to a dog breeder. So there's lots of photos of puppies right now, and it's very, very good.
Yep. So like you said, today we're talking about a deck.
Yeah. And this was kind of out of the blue, because this one just showed up in the results, and we kind of figured we could have a little bit of discussion about it and the sort of overarching game plan that it represents. And the deck we're talking about today is a red-green land destruction deck from the one, the only, the man who left Magic to learn how to dance. Conley Woods.
I did not know that fact. That's an interesting fact, Mike.
You didn't know this? Conley Woods
No,
actually stopped playing Magic as much because he wanted to learn how to dance, and he wanted to devote time to it.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, so the first time when I first got into Magic, Conley Woods was piloting that deck in Standard with like Primeval Titan, Keswick Wolfrun, and Inkmoth Nexus, and I used to think that deck was super cool. So I am excited to talk about his land destruction deck here today.
Yeah, he's always kind of been on the fringes of like what people consider reasonable decks to play. And he's sometimes had these huge hits where he's managed to, crack a metagame wide open because he figured out the one thing that no one had thought of that worked well. And, I don't know, he's kind of, he was for a while to the Pro Tour what Saffron Olive is these days to content creation. He was just always showing up with some weird deck people hadn't seen before. And apparently he wanted to play some Pauper, so he played red-green Ponza.
And we featured this deck on the show before, but it is interesting to see, someone of Conley's caliber's take on the deck.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Well, so let's get right into it, and we're not gonna. I think it's best not to tackle this strictly by card type, because the first thing I want to talk about is the Arbor Elf little miniature package. So this deck plays 4 copies of Arbor Elf, then 4 copies of Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth. And for those unfamiliar, Arbor Elf is 1 green mana for a elf. It's a 1/1, and it taps to untap target forest. But then you're also running Wild Sprawl, or Utopia Sprawl, which is 1 green for a enchantment aura, enchant forest. As it enters the battlefield, choose a color whenever enchanted forest is tapped for mana. You get a mana of whatever color was chosen with Utopia Sprawl. And then Wild Growth is 1 green and channel land. Whenever this land is tapped for mana, it adds an additional green. So this kind of is this little miniature engine where you go turn 1, Arbor Elf, and then like turn 2, second land, tap it, enchant the other land with one of these land enchantments, and then all of a sudden you have 4 mana on turn 2. So this is a pretty powerful engine, right? This has seen modern play, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the deck is pretty similar to its modern counterpart. If you look at the actual land destruction spells, we have 4 copies of Stone Rain, 4 copies of Thermokarst. Those are both 3 mana spells. Stone Rain's 2 and a red, destroy target land. Thermokarst is 2 green and 1, destroy target land. If that land is a snow-covered land, gain 1 life. Could be relevant against Delver. 3 copies of Earth Rift, which is 3 and a red, destroy target land, flashback, 5 red. So you get 2 land destruction spells on 1 card. And then we also have Monvuli, Acid Moss. 2 green gets you a sorcery, destroy target land, search your library for a forest card, put that card into play tap, then shuffle your library. So we have and there's also Mold Shambler, which is a creature with kicker, and when you kick it, it destroys target non-creature permanent, so you can use it to destroy lands. So that one is a bit of a popper special, but the other ones are very similar to the modern version as well, where you're playing the Stone Rains and the Molten Rains.
Yeah, so we get access to a couple of things that Modern doesn't have access to. Namely, Earth Rift is 2 Stone Rains stapled together. They're both overcosted, but it does mean that, every one of these that you draw, if you can cast both sides of it, it, pulls double duty. And I kind of scoffed at this in the pre-show, but actually walking through like the 2-land Arbor Elf and land enchantment hand, like that's pretty viable to hit 4 mana on turn 2. This is actually a little bit more real than I think I expected. Though I guess would you rather have that, or would you rather have Acid Moss in your opener if you have that kind of explosive start?
Acid Moss, I think, would be a little bit better if you can cast it. If you can have 4 mana on turn 2, I think Acid Moss is just probably the better one, because then you can ramp yourself a little further and then maybe play a Mold Shambler or something the turn after on 6.
Ooh, yeah, you could. Wow, that's real gross. And this deck's also playing Tinderwall, which is 1 red or 1 green for an 0/3. You can sacrifice it to add red to your mana pool, or you can pay a red to sacrifice it and have it deal 2 damage to target creature that it is blocking. And I don't think I've ever actually seen that second mode used on this thing.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it either.
This is also playing Entourage of Trest, the 4 and a green for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch, and as long as you're the monarch, it can block an additional creature each turn. And then rounding out the creatures, there's 2 copies of Ulamog's Crusher, because of course it's playing Ulamog's Crusher. This deck is ramping itself, and then this also happens to keep your opponent off lands if they're a little bit behind. This is a pretty spicy little thing here.
Yeah, so its primary strategy is denying your opponent mana while simultaneously ramping into your huge spells, which again is a lot like the modern version, except we don't get access to Inferno Titan. But that our payout cards are Entourage of Trest, which I actually like a lot. It lets you draw an extra card, which could be relevant in the late game in order to like get more threats or pick off remaining lands from your opponent. And then obviously Ulamog's Crusher can end games very quickly. We also have a little bit of interaction in the form of Firebolt, 2 damage to target creature or player for R, and then flashback 4 on an R, and then Serrated Arrows, which is 4 colorless mana for an artifact, comes into play with 3 arrowhead counters on it. And basically you can tap it to put -1/-1 counters on creatures, and then when there's no more counters, you get rid of it. It's kind of wordy, but it's good.
It's wordy, and actually this last weekend, I think I cast this card, I want to say like 15 or 20 times between Pauper and EDH.
That's funny.
Yeah, like weird little coincidence. I just kept having to explain this card to strangers. But that has to be, I can only imagine that has to be a concession to both Monarchs tokens and Delver as a deck.
Yeah, it's pretty good against both of those decks.
Yeah, so the game plan here really is like have a land destruction spell on turn 2 and hope that sets your opponent back enough that you can start kind of progressing your game plan without your opponent being able to progress theirs. And you know, it has a lot of like neat little tech. Like I really like Mold Shambler for what it's worth. It's 3 and a green for a 3/3 that when it, as you mentioned, as it ETBs, you can kick it for another 2 mana to blow up a non-creature permanent. This is nice not only as land destruction, but if your opponent sticks some sort of pesky artifact or enchantment, this can eat that as well. So it does have kind of a little bit of versatility in terms of the things it can actually destroy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, let's say your Ulamog is underneath a journey. No more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's being able to destroy a non-creature permanent is very powerful in this format.
Yeah. So I guess this type of deck I've seen before as mono green. So you kind of lose out on some of the more powerful red options in the deck in terms of land destruction, but it does kind of help you out with your mana. I do want to note, like, there's 18 lands in this deck. It's 11 forests, 7 mountains. There's no dual lands, no fetches. That seems bold.
So, I guess the reason for that is that you want to be able to play a turn 1 Arbor Elf, Tenderwall, Utopia Sprawl, or Wild Growth. And I think upping the forest count over some of the duels is better so that you can consistently make a turn 1 green play. And it matters a little bit less, but the only double costed spells in the deck, at least on the front half, are green. Earth Rift is red on the back end, but I think that's a little bit less important than its initial cast. And so I think that's the reason. I think you up the forest and just lower the mountains because you always want to hit green 1-drops.
Yeah, and I think if you conceptualize Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth as kind of explores, at least the front half of it, not the draw card part, but the getting an extra land down, and even more so if you happen to have the Arbor Elf as well. I think that does help kind of artificially pad the land count. 18 still seems pretty slim to me, though. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not saying that is great, but I think that's why you don't have the duels.
No, that definitely tracks for me. Now in the sideboard, there's some interesting tech. Namely, 3 copies of Granger Guildmage, which is a green for a 1/1. And you can pay a white, tap it, target creature gains first strike until end of turn. Or red and tap it, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player and 1 damage to you. As we talked before the show, I've got to imagine this is a Delver concession, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that this deck is absolutely stacked against Delver. Between the Serrated Arrows, the Firebolts, the Granger Guildmages, there are more cards here in the sideboard that I think are help make that matchup good too. So yeah, it's very good.
We've got like a Firebolt, 3 copies of Nature's Claim, 2 Pyroblasts, 2 Feed the Clan, the final Earth Rift, the last 2 Serrated Arrows, and a Swirling Sandstorm. I'm actually realizing I don't know if most of the blue-red Delver decks, or mono blue for that matter, have a real reliable way of dealing with a result, one of the land enchantments once it's resolved, which is kind of the thing that if you can get rid of those, whether by bouncing the land, blowing up the land, what have you, if you can deal with those, that generally helps put these decks a little bit on the back foot. But I've got to imagine this does pretty well in that matchup, and it probably even does okay against Boros Monarch, I'm imagining.
I think it does well against any decks that want to utilize a lot of mana. And I think Boros Monarch definitely needs a lot of mana. So yeah, I could see it being very, very good there. And I think it's very stacked against Delver too.
Yeah, I've got to imagine against Boros Monarch, just the fact that you're running 7 or 8 tapped lands, and some of those are Karus.
Yeah, and land destruction like loves killing Karu lands. It's like one of the best lands to blow up, in my opinion.
Oh yeah,
or the word. Yeah, it feels super, super sweet.
Yeah, so I think this may just be like a somewhat next level meta call, just because it is attacking on an axis that just the decks that are currently performing really well have a difficult time interacting with. It also has the added upside of naturally hosing Tron decks that are seeking to assemble specific combinations of lands, not just a critical mass of them. Like, being able to keep them off Tron for a while is probably a pretty good way to sort of stall out their game plan.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I think it worked, and Conley made it work. So.
Yeah, I think the only thing that really surprises me that much about this sideboard is 0 Gorilla Shamans.
Yeah, and I guess you have to imagine maybe he's thinking of Nature's Claim being good in that matchup, or maybe he just doesn't care. Maybe he says, I'm blowing up their lands, and Affinity needs their lands almost as much as those other decks in order to maintain the affinity count, so you can kill their lands already. Maybe you just don't need the Gorilla Shaman.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. And I mean, thinking it through now, actually, like, Gorilla Shaman usually doesn't come down until turn 2 anyway, so you can at least activate it once. And like, this has a decent number of hands that are going to be able to play a land destruction spell on turn 2. So I guess there's not that much difference, because if you can close the door turn 2, it doesn't really matter how you're doing it.
And I think that that's part of the strength of the modern deck as well. Obviously, they have access to a few more disruptive pieces, like they have Blood Moon and they have better mana, but their best play is like turn 1 Arbor Elf, turn 2 land destruction. Yeah,
just really forcing your opponent to have that extra land and not have kept like an even moderately sketchy hand. And I think another one of the benefits of this deck is the fact that it isn't something that's frequently seen in our metagame. So just sort of having your opponent be caught off guard by, blowing up their lands, and, in the dark, sometimes you keep a hand where it's like, yeah, this is fine. Like, I'm a little light on land, but, I've got time to make it there. And then all of a sudden, your opponent blows up 1 or 2 lands, and that hand suddenly goes from being, B- to B to being, C- D+. So I think this was as much a meta call as, Conley has spoken before. He likes land destruction. He also likes weird decks that no one else runs. So I think this all kind of tracks for me in terms of what I know of Conley Woods as a Magic player. So I'm not surprised that this was something that he gravitated to. It's just kind of impressive to see him put up a 5-0 with it. So yeah. I guess from here, the next thing I do want to touch on is this week's results had 3 different land destruction decks in them. Is this just where you want to be in some cases in this current metagame?
I think that being able to blow up a land and popper is pretty strong on turn 2, like it is in most formats. So I really don't know. I'm not like an expert with the deck or anything. I don't know if I would personally feel comfortable playing it, but I think that there are a lot of decks out there and with greedy mana bases that you can easily punish with this deck if you hit the right matchups.
Yeah, and I'm just looking here at some of the other ones. Like, there's a mono black land destruction deck that's running Dark Ritual, so it can turn 1, Choking Sands or Icequake or Rancid Earth the opponent.
I feel like there are some decks though where land destruction just super falters. Like, what about against elves? Like, it just doesn't seem any good against elves.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be one of the one of the tougher matchups just by nature of if not if they have the turn 1 mana dork, when they have the turn 1 mana dork, they might be able to dig out of that. And this deck is very, very light on ways to interact with creatures. The mono black version, on the other hand, does get the benefit of stuff like Befoul and, an amount of edicts. But this green red deck it's got a copy of Firebolt, and that's about it.
It's got serrated arrows.
It's got serrated arrows, I guess, but even if you turn to that, like, I don't know, on the draw, they've probably already gotten out a second elf by the time, second, possibly third elf by the time you're casting your thing that should have dealt with the first one. And again, like, a league is 5 rounds. You don't have to be able to beat every deck in the metagame. You have to be able to beat the 5 decks that you play against. So I guess besides elves, what other decks do you think these sorts of strategies are just not going to have a good time against? Or is it just elves?
So I did mention Affinity earlier as being like, well, maybe they don't need Gorilla Shaman because they can just blow up Affinity's lands. I think if Affinity just has the nut draw where they're just like, turn 2, I play a bunch of Frog Mites and a Mirror Enforcer and you're dead. Like, I think then this deck would probably struggle against those sorts of openers. I think any deck that can just go very quickly, it doesn't care about its land drops so much because it gets some, it has a bunch of like 1 drops or 2 drops. I think it cares a little bit less than some other decks. I imagine that in some cases, like Gush is probably very good against this deck because when they go to blow up your land, you can just Gush. So that seems pretty strong.
I mean, in addition to that, I've also got to imagine that any deck that can resolve a threat larger than a 4/4 is probably going to have a pretty decent time. Like, if they can establish an early threat that is larger than Entourage of Trest, the deck only does have 2 Ulamog's Crushers and nothing in the way of card draw. So I don't know. I guess what deck actually establishes a threat that early besides Reanimator?
Sorry, I'm just trying to think through it. I guess there might be some sort of red deck, Sandstone Spire is what I was thinking of. But no, I think you're right. I think Reanimator is probably the fastest.
Yeah, so I think this deck is just well positioned by nature of where the format is right now. Those are its weak points, and I guess like being on the draw versus blue decks that decide to leave up blue that on turn 2. So a non-zero amount of the metagame at any given time, but I still don't think like it's completely dead in the water in those matchups either. So I think the decks are interesting. I guess is this something that you're at all interested in, giving a whirl?
I mentioned earlier I wasn't sure if I would feel comfortable piloting it, but I think it'd be fun to take to F&M or maybe play a little bit in some of the 2-man or 2 people keys, on Magic Online. So yeah, if land destruction interests you as a concept, I think it's definitely worth checking out. I think it's probably one of the better iterations of the deck in the format, the red-green version as opposed to the mono black or Sultai one.
Yeah, I mean that Sultai one hasn't put up any sort of results in a while now, so I think that one's a little on the out and out. So I guess we had talked a little bit before in the pre-show, and you'd kind of wanted to touch on sort of the role of land destruction decks within Magic's history, and I guess if you could kind of start in on that, I think that'd be a good next chunk of this discussion.
Yeah, so land destruction's been in the game, I think since the beginning. Yeah, isn't Sinkhole an alpha card?
Yep, Sinkhole and Stone Rain, actually. Stone Rain's been here since the beginning.
There you go. So the idea of like mana denial has always been around in the game. In various powerful versions. There was a mono black deck and the Necropotence deck that had a lot of mana denial in it. That's back when you could play 4 strip mines, which is just an insane land destruction card. It's just a land for a land.
Yep, and usually the land you're blowing up is better than strip mine.
Right, and Sinkhole, I think, is also a good card to talk about in Pauper. You know, there are a lot of people who think it should be downshifted or, brought into the format somehow. I'm not entirely sure it's a bad thing. I think it's probably one of the least strong of the strong cards that could possibly let into the format. So I don't know. You can definitely try it out and let us know what you think, but I don't think it would really be that bad.
I mean, I guess, does it just bring mono black land destruction options to a density where it's enough to kind of make that type of deck a problem?
I don't know if it'd be a problem. I just think it'd be sort of like in the same vein as this Arbor Elf deck here, where you're trying to play a land destruction spell on turn 2, because I think that's just, one of the best turns to play a land destruction spell on.
Yeah, I think that's generally right. The longer the discussion of like the handful of cards that are relevant, that are commons in paper and aren't online, the longer that discussion carries on, the more I'm fine with Sinkhole. I don't think it's going to, break the format wide open. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I just don't think it's one of the worst defenders. I think Goblin Grenade would be a lot more problematic.
Yeah.
Or him.
Yeah, him is a completely different beast than any of those other cards, and definitely the one that should never show up in this format. It's not a good and healthy card in this format.
But I think, I think we would be remiss not to talk about Sinkhole in some capacity.
No, I think that's completely fair. Because if we didn't, I'm sure our lovely viewers would let us know that we had failed to do so. But with that, so there was kind of the mono black land destruction in the early days, or the mono black deck that had land destruction in the early days of Magic. What other decks have kind of showed up over the course of Magic's history that have made use of attacking along this angle?
Sorry, I'm just I'm thinking. We've already talked about the modern one. We talked about the really old one. Is there another big land destruction deck? I guess there's the original Ponza deck, but I wasn't playing at that time, so I would have to actually go look up a deck list.
Well, buddy, I'll tell you what. I was playing at that time. And back in the day, there were all sorts of very, very good land destruction spells. I'm trying to see if I can pull up an older list of this. Nope, that's a modern one, or I guess some sort of non. All right, here we go. This isn't it either. Because I'm specifically thinking of. Is this it? Nope. I'm specifically thinking of the era when Avalanche Rider showed up, because that was kind of a big deal. Avalanche Rider, for those who don't know, is 3 in a red for a 2/2 with haste that when it comes into play, you blow up a land, and then it has Echo. So you have to pay 2 in a red to keep it, or 3 in a red to keep it around. But this was the version of it that I remember from my childhood. And it was, kind of a mono red deck that sought to that sought to attack your opponent's mana base as well as its life total.
I found it.
You did?
Yeah. So yeah, it had Avalanche Riders to destroy lands. It had Masticore, I guess, as a win con, and then it had a bunch of like kind of bad red land destruction spell. Oh no, it had Pillage. So Pillage is actually in Pauper now as well. So it had 4 Pillage and 4 Stone Rain as its land destruction package.
Yeah, along with the Avalanche Riders that blow stuff up on ETB.
And Boil.
Oh yeah, because those were cards that went through Standard.
Here's the real reason I think you could play it, is it played Ports and Dust Bowl, so it had land destruction on lands, which is like the best place to have land destruction.
Yeah, and I believe prior to this, there was a rendition of this deck in, I think, Extended that had Hammer of Bogarden in it, as well as like this very grindy red card. I don't know. It was Magic used to be weird. But I think sort of the original sort of iteration of this mono red Ponza deck was this red deck wins deck that also happened to have all these sort of incidental ways to mess with your opponent's mana so that they couldn't enact whatever game plan they were working on while you were just beating them to death with 2/2s. Jackal Pup and Avalanche Riders and that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting to see where that has led us to today. Do you maybe want to talk about, I know you have a soft spot for it, Legacy Pox?
Yeah, so I just think it's a fun deck. Legacy. So Pox is a card where you sacrifice lands, creatures, and your life total. Small Pox has another variation of that, except you do it for 1 instead of 3, which is what regular Pox does. But the deck is all about tapping, like making sure you get value by destroying your opponent's lands and making them sacrifice their creatures and discard cards, and then eventually you bring back like a card that recurs from your graveyard and beat them to death with it. So it's a pretty sweet recipe that plays very well in black.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that kind of separates the Pauper versions of these decks from their Legacy and Modern equivalents is while we have the land destruction spells, we don't really have any of the big payoffs, because what's the payoff in Legacy Pox is they're still running like Mishra's Factory and Mutavaults, right?
Yeah, you have the animation lands. I don't know, the lands that become creatures, and you also have cards like Nether Spirit.
Oh,
which
that's
which come back from your graveyard, or Nether Shadow.
Yeah, those are cards, but those are kind of that. And for the modern version, sort of the top end, because I pulled up one of those lists beforehand, and there's nothing in Pauper that really compares to Inferno Titans, Thragtusks, Stormbreath Dragons, Pia and Kieran Nalaar. Like, these are very, very good top end cards. These are things that just close out the game like nobody's business. And we're kind of dealing with maybe beating your opponent to death with an Entourage of Trest as a win con. So I think that's the big thing. Pauper has never had either the heavily recursive threat or the sort of just go over the top thing. If your opponent is struggling to get to 3 mana and you're already at 6 or 7, like, yeah, you can just start dropping these huge dumb threats that continue to keep your opponent off their game plan. Whereas in Pauper, like Crusher kind of does that, but it's not a Titan, right?
Right. It doesn't have the same game ending panache.
Now, one of the things I did like about one of these other land destruction decks is a mono green one that showed up this week. It's playing Sprout Swarm, along with a lot of top end. It's playing 3 Greater Sandworms, 4 Crushers, and 4 Crozen Tuskers. So just really, really leaning in on the idea of like, yeah, once I get to like 5+ mana, I'm just going to start doing either really grindy or just really big, dumb things. So that's kind of a little bit more like the red-green late game plan in Modern. But I don't know. Are there any other sort of, classic land destruction decks that you think bear mentioning?
I guess we could also just talk about like Wasteland, which is a big card in Legacy.
Yeah. Do you want to sort of lead that in? Explain to people first what Wasteland does and why this is such an important card.
Sure. Let me look up the exact text. I know what it does. It destroys non-basic lands, but I want to tell everyone at home the exact wording on the card. Ahem. You can tap it to add colors to your mana pool, or sacrifice Wasteland, destroy target non-basic land. And when I first started playing Magic, I couldn't figure out why this was a $50 card and Strip Mine was a $5 card. The answer is because Strip Mine is banned in Legacy.
Yeah, it sure is.
And Strip Mine is, objectively the better card, perhaps a bit too strong. Wasteland still sees Legacy play in a ton of decks. It's, one of the go-to land destruction cards, and definitely a symbol of the format. Is that the correct term? like a poster child for the format.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Wasteland has and continues to be one of the sort of omnipresent cards of the format. Although we're starting to get to the point where, with how Legacy is handling mana bases, that people have started, at least in Death and Taxes list, to play Ghost Quarter instead, because people just aren't playing basics.
Yeah, the most decks play very few, if any. So you can get people with Ghost Quarter a lot.
And also recently, we did see the printing of Field of Ruin, which is currently putting in work both in Standard and in Modern. So sort of the genesis. So it's funny, you look at it, Wizards' constant attempt to like see how bad they can make land destruction on a land, and people will still play it, and it just keeps going, right? Like, because you had Strip Mine, which is just a land that blows up a land. It doesn't care what it is, it just blows it up. Then they're like, all right, Wasteland, non-basics only. And then they had like Dust Bowl, that's like mana cost and non-basics only. And then it gets to like Ghost Quarter, which is a land that taps, sacrifices, blows up another land. Its controller gets to tutor up a basic. And now they've got Field of Ruin, which is taps for colorless, tap 2, tap Sagat, destroy target land. Both you and each opponent go and tutor up a basic. So they've really taken this effect and seen how bad they can make it. And Field of Ruin is a $4 card right now. Like,
still a good card.
Yeah, it turns out being able to shut down like utility lands is still worth mana and letting your opponent tutor up another land to replace it. That's how good it is. So I just think that's kind of an interesting sort of path that these sorts of effects have taken over the years. I guess one of the other things that might be worth touching on is other land destruction spells that none of these decks are currently utilizing. Because there are actually quite a few in Pauper. Like, it's not exactly a rare effect. And I think there's a handful of them that are definitely kind of a little bit higher on the list for me. Starting up top of the alphabet, we've got Aftershock, which is 2 red, so a little bit more expensive and mana intensive than some of these other options, but it destroys target artifact, creature, or land, and then you get bolted. What do you think of this effect?
You know, I actually don't hate it. The extra costing 4 mana, I think the reason when Volley Acid Moss is so good is because it also Ramsey, which is our decks, the red green decks plan. But I actually don't hate this. The utility of being able to destroy an artifact or a creature does seem fairly strong to me.
Yeah, and getting bolted is not great, but this is just like utility removal. It hits 3 different card types. I think it could be worse. Also catching my eye. What else do we have here? I guess there's Drain the Well, which is a black-green one that gains you 2 life. That's not amazing.
Yeah, and as we look through these, I noticed that most of them are they just cost too much. They're 4 mana or 5 mana, and like I mentioned, unless the upside is really strong, like I see Earth Rifts on here, and then we just talked about Aftershock, I don't think you can really go past 3 for the spell to be good.
How about a lot of Stone Rain stapled together? That also, or I guess a lot of Pillages stapled together. Icefall, 2 red, sorcery, destroy target artifact or land. And then it has it. It has my favorite niche keyword. It has Recover red. Huh. So for those unaware, Recover is a ability printed on cards that has a mana cost associated with it. And Recover reads, if this card's in your graveyard and a creature you control dies, you can pay its Recover cost. If you do, return it to your hand. If you don't, exile it. So when something dies on your side of the board, you get this flash chance to pay up some mana, get the spell back, and if you don't, it's gone forever. So, what do you think of this one?
I feel like you will never trigger this recover.
I feel like it's rarer, but it is a pillage, and I'm just trying to figure out like
pillage only costs 3 mana though.
Yeah.
So
I guess it's a more expensive pillage. But what if, and come along with me on this magical carpet ride I'm about to take, what if you're playing some modern tech in here? What if you're taking a note out of the Scape Shift decks and you're running Sakura Tribe Elder?
Oh. I don't hate that. That seems decent.
It seems a little janky. Next, like relevant one here. Let's say Molten Rain. You mentioned this one briefly. It's 1 red, sorcery, destroy target land. If that land was non-basic, it deals 2 damage to that land's controller. And I've got to imagine this just didn't make the cut in Conley's deck just because of the mana cost, specifically color-intensive mana cost.
Yeah, I think his deck is just, it wants to be more green than red, and this encourages you to be more red. So I think that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Same with pillage.
Oh, here's another one. How about Reap and Sow? The 3 and a green sorcery, choose 1, destroy target land, or search your library for a land and put it into play. Then shuffle your library. And it has Entwine, 1 and a green. So for 4 green, you get a sorcery that blows up one of their land. It's another Acid Moss.
Yeah, it's Acid Moss 5, and if you're playing it for that reason, I don't hate it. Acid Moss is a fairly strong card. You can play this after an Acid Moss. I mean, you have to have another land in your hand, but you could. So I don't hate it, but I think the Acid Moss is definitely the stronger card.
Yeah, that, and the second the hidden mode on Reap and Sow of search your library for a land and put it into play is not enticing outside of sort of a Tron strategy where you're getting a bunch of mana out of that land.
And I did play this, or I played when I played the Sultai version of this deck, the land destruction deck, I did play Reap and Sow, and I believe it was in there in order to get bounce lands.
Yeah, I think anything where you're kind of getting a land that produces more than 1 mana, I feel a little bit better about this. But that said, even then, 6 mana land destruction / ramp is still 6 mana. That's kind of a little bit later than you want to be blowing up lands, and a little bit later than when you want to be ramping.
What do you think of Seismic Spike?
Seismic Spike. Let me find this one. Ooh.
2 RR, sorcery, destroy target land, add RR to your mana pool.
So you can kind of cast one of these, and as long as you can pay 2 generic, kind of chain them together.
Yeah, and I think the reason we don't see this card is because it costs 4 mana, and then probably just adding temporarily red to your mana pool isn't the strongest effect. But it is cool that there's like a ritual land destruction spell.
Yeah, I think that is kind of neat. And then I think at that point we're kind of getting into like the weird niche options. Like, I don't think anyone's really looking at Survey the Wreckage, 4 and a red for a sorcery, destroy a land, and then you get a 1/1 red goblin creature token.
That's cute. What about Violent Impact? Destroy target artifact or land, 3 and a red, but with cycling.
I think this is actually a functional reprint. We also have Lay Waste, which is actually no, Lay Waste doesn't have the mode of destroy an artifact. So this is actually a strictly better version of Lay Waste. So never mind. I don't hate the fact that it has cycling. That said, no. You know what? Never mind. I think having cycling on one of your land destruction spells is probably okay, just because this is a deck that is a little light on actual ways to win the game. So being able to say, all right, I have this land destruction spell. It's not the best costed, but if I draw this late game, I'll just cycle it away to try and dig to an actual win cost. I really, really don't mind that.
Yeah.
Just looking around. Yeah?
Right after it, there's Volcanic Submersion on this list, which is the exact same thing, except it costs 1 more.
Yeah, I mean things have been getting better and better over time. There's
Funny.
also like niche ones like Volcanic Upheaval, 3 in a red, destroy a land, but it's an instant.
It's pretty interesting.
Um,
Instant resting.
no, don't do that.
I did. Sorry.
No. I'm obviously just kidding.
No, I know.
There's a couple of these. There's a couple of instant speed ones, and that's definitely one of those effects that Wizards kind of tried to avoid for a long time. Was the instant speed land destruction? Kind of falls into the same realm for them as the instant speed discard, where it's not the type of effect that they really like to do.
Except on other lands.
Yeah, except on other lands, because Strip Mine's a fair card, Adrian. You're just trading a land for a land. I don't see what the problem is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. Like, this is definitely one of those effects that they keep flirting with, and one of these days they'll print one that's actually fair. But until then, we're gonna keep getting these cards played in a bunch of formats. So I guess now that we've kind of walked through some of the options for land destruction in Pauper, what if anything do you think could make this kind of archetype really sing and kind of be like a tier 1 archetype? And do you think it would be okay for the format to have something like this as a tier 1 archetype?
Sorry, I'm just processing all of that. I don't know. I think that against certain decks in Pauper, it is good. And I think that those decks are more prevalent in a format like Modern, where you have, perfect mana, but like you're running fewer lands overall, and your colors might matter a little bit more. Whereas in Pauper, you're blowing up basics a lot of the time too. And sure, it's annoying, but the mana requirements are a little bit less color intensive. So I wonder if just the way that mana works in other formats makes land destruction better in those formats than it can ever be in Pauper because of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, so it just sort of as a counterpoint, like while being able to Stone Rain your opponent's shock land that they took 2 to have come in untapped is, kind of a double whammy. Pauper still has that a little bit in the form of like, your opponent is trying to, if your opponent is playing a 2-color deck and has ETB tapped lands,
You're right.
like if they draw that and they're down to like 2 lands and they need to hit their third, they might as well not have hit a land there, because it's just not going to get the job done.
Maybe it needs better interaction to stall the game out, or maybe it needs like a better payoff. Maybe it's a combination of both of those. I think the one in Modern has Anger the Gods, and certainly having a card like Inferno Titan helps end the game so much faster than some of the threats we have in Pauper. So I wonder if that's part of it as well. Like maybe the payoffs just aren't as good, and so I guess the decks in the format.
Let me hit you with a hypothetical card. And this is something that Wizards has been doing more and more, where they've been printing these almost main deckable sideboard cards, and in some cases main deckable, like Braid from Hour of Devastation, the one red, either bolt a creature or blow up an artifact. What if we got like, I don't know, 3 in a red, blow up an artifact or bolt
At instant speed?
Let's hear the answer for both of those. Will that change your answer if it's instant versus sorcery?
Yeah, I think so. Because the only other card that I could even think of doing something like that is like, wait, so destroyed artifact or bolt?
No. I'm saying destroy a land or bolt for 3 in a red.
Oh, I thought you said an artifact. I was like, I think we have better cards than that, but okay. For land destruction, I think definitely an instant would be good. But as a sorcery, 4 mana again is just like so high. But if you had the opportunity of like destroying opponent's creatures as well, like in the late game, then yeah, I think it'd be worth it.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of like getting some sort of slightly modal card, or getting like even a miserable version of the Field of Ruin Ghost Quarter style effect would probably be enough to make it. Actually,
Just anything on a land.
Would Ghost Quarter be fine in this format? Like,
so that's an interesting question because this format is so heavy on basics. It would be extremely good against decks like Affinity. It would be very good against, I think, actually Blue-Red Delver because you could just nuke their two mountains. So I think it would be very strong against some decks, but against others, I think it'd be like obviously it's not that great against like elves or
I mean,
blue.
Against elves, like it's arguable that you don't use it just because you're thinning their deck.
Right. So yeah, I think it'd be strong, but there's a real lack of utility lands in Pauper, so I think you'd mostly be using it to like color constrict people.
I think it does put in work against Tron for what it's worth, and
that's
being able
true.
to blow up a Karoo with a land is probably a pretty big game.
Yeah, that is big game. You're right.
So I don't want to say like, you know, Herder, let's downshift this to common, but you know, just kind of a thought experiment. So I guess do you have anything else sort of on the topic of land destruction as a whole within Pauper and without it?
It's not very fun to play against, Mike.
I mean, it isn't. It's never been fun. Like, that's not the point of this archetype. Like, Armageddon is not a fun card. But that said, you know, props to Conley for, you know, figuring out how to take this old archetype from way back in Urza's block and before and sort of make it work in his own way within the confines of Pauper. That's pretty neat, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty sweet.
All right. I guess if there's nothing else that you have that you want to sort of touch upon on this topic, maybe you want to take us on out of the show?
Yeah, I can do that. Thank you all for listening today. And especially a big shout out to our patron, Urson. I think that's who you were talking about earlier, so I wanted to give them a shout out. This podcast is brought to you by the support. Sorry, go ahead.
Different person, not the dog person, but Urson is good people, and I've had a lot of very fruitful discussions with them that I've enjoyed deeply. So definitely a perk of being on the Discord. Thank you very much, Urson. You're appreciated.
And you too, consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We like to remind you if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to Pat's Games and JP Comics, our LGSs, and L. You can find our theme song Quantitative and other great tracks over at his SoundCloud, which is soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.